So welcome. Want to talk about the 1, 2, 3's of rainwater harvesting. And my background is basically landscape architecture. I worked in Ontario for 25 years, took an early retirement from the University of Guelph in Ridgetown, and ended here on the island. Started working with Gaia College. I still work with Gaia and teach rainwater harvesting and SketchUp for landscape. Work also with the Canadian Association for Rainwater Management and the American Rainwater Catchment Systems Association, training and demonstrating and working with different groups on understanding rainwater harvesting like we are here. It was a course at Rainwater College that was set up ready to go and may come back again, and I do some consulting under Kenwood Design Associates, the name of our company. So you'll see these logos here on the right that appear periodically on some of the slides because that's kind of their source. That's about me. Let's talk about rainwater harvesting best practices. The three steps. The first is the why. What is the reason for harvesting rainwater? And there are several reasons. The second is the what, which is components of the harvesting system. The third is the details, how to go about deciding which components, how they go together, the sizing of the cistern, and those types of things. The very first point is why. There is a lot of change going on, change that needs to go on. We're looking at going away from the pipe and convey approach of dealing with water, off the roof, through the downspouts, into the storm drain, and away it goes and it's gone. And going into a centralized source of water. This paradigm shift, a new way of thinking, is something people just are somewhat hesitant to get into, but is required. This is a sample of paradigm shift. It's Stockholm, Sweden, September 14th, 1959, 5 p.m. This is when they changed from driving on the left side of the road to driving on the right side of the road. That is a paradigm shift. A completely new way of thinking, a completely new way of acting, something out of the ordinary from the past. We're looking at that now with water as a resource rather than water as a waste item. There are definitions that are kind of all over the book right now, and one of the things in this paradigm shift is trying to get a handle on what the terminology is. Rainwater from natural precipitation, anything that lands on man-made or natural surfaces, anything that contacts an above-grade impermeable surface. Stormwater is natural precipitation, could be overland flow, water generated when precipitation is not infiltrated into the ground, and so on. There's also confusion with grey water. Rainwater is not grey water. In some jurisdictions, rainwater is stormwater. Other jurisdictions, stormwater is rainwater. So we have to work on those definitions, and that's one of the processes that's underway too. There are many different versions of this type of mapping. This is from the National Academy of Sciences, but they say that there are uses of grey water and stormwater, and in this case stormwater includes rainwater, or means rainwater, from urban and landscape, wildlife, and large-scale projects, toilet and urinal flushing, firefighting, heating and air conditioning, vehicle washing, laundry, the whole landscape aspect, and how this all works together, and how grey water fits into it too. So there's lots of studies out there to see what's going on, and to kind of determine where we're going to go. One of the things I ask my students when we first start is, okay, why? Why are we talking rainwater? Is it for irrigation, or for flushing, or stormwater, fire suppression, emergency preparedness? In a more urban or commercial setting, it could be for water cooling in the cooling towers, for air conditioning systems, heat systems, those types of things. Um, Subsurface irrigation is permitted in most locations, almost universally. Some places will allow us to use rainwater without much in the way of treatment for surface spray irrigation, other places for drip. Flushing is permitted according to the building code, and unless you're in a municipality where they don't want you to use rainwater, then perhaps it's more of, they want you to use municipal water, then perhaps flushing may not be as predominant, but that may come down the road. Stormwater management is a huge municipal focus, and so capturing rainwater, stormwater, holding it back, called detention, or holding it on site and having it infiltrate, called retention, is pretty important. Fire suppression, big news, especially with the fires and the dry seasons that we have through the summer. I'm starting to experience more and more the drought-related aspects. And then we are in an earthquake zone here on the island, and emergency preparedness is also a big part of that as well. When we speak of irrigation, about a third of the potable water is used outdoors in the CRD, Capital Regional District here. It doesn't have to be potable water, it could be rainwater. And a lot of that irrigation water is also wasted. There's a tremendous amount of waste. We are heavy users of water, and we could improve on the quantities that we use. We could also improve on using rainwater versus potable water. Flushing takes about half of the indoor use of water, and that is, again, not necessary to be potable water going down the toilet, literally down the drain. So there's another use for it. For stormwater management, this is a photograph of 5 meters of stormwater over top of a river. So the river is maybe 8 or 10 feet, 12 feet, 15 feet deep itself, and then these 5 meters of storm surge on top. Water running off of the surfaces, the buildings, the roadways, parking lots, patios, in this particular case frozen ground, and it accumulates and has to go someplace, and so we pipe it, we channel it, and we try and make it work, and we get these floods. Fire suppression by having a storage area of water that the fire department can access, or having it ready to go with a sprinkler system. Pretty important in reducing the incidence of fire, and also reducing insurance claims. Rainwater can be used for that. And why not have large tanks of rainwater available at emergency sites, that when there are muster stations and people go to these places, these safe places to gather, that they have a supply of water already there. And rather than removing that decentralized source, which is bottled water, and moving that around the different places, we have it at a place where we know we can access it, which is already created as a safe place, and it's ready to go. It can be made potable, and we know it's there. So rainwater can also be used for that. When we start answering the question, what, we get into some of the kind of configurations of rainwater systems. This one here is a 1,300 gallon tank. It has a solar battery pump on it that can be hooked up to a garden hose. You see the garden hose sitting on the ground there. There's also a manual spigot at the bottom of the tank. The water comes in through the piping up on the left-hand side and is filtered. To a certain extent, it could use more filtration. And there's an overflow at the back that goes out to the original storm drain connection. There's a wire wrapped around that one pipe there, and it goes up to a solar collector, and that is what recharges the battery for that little pump. It's a battery pump, so the solar energy recharges the battery, runs for about an hour, then it needs to be recharged. This is a system in Nanaimo. It captures off of a flat roof through 2 downspouts. It goes through a WYSI filter in this case. It's a vortex filter, 280 microns. The filtered water goes down into the first tank on the left through a calming inlet where the water comes back up into the water. In the tank, it's not forcing itself down or pushing down on the bottom of the tank, so that the whatever sediment is there is not being stirred around. The wastewater from the filter goes over and down into the drain, storm drain, and the overflow from the tank goes into the storm drain as well. And on the right hand side is an optional second tank for next year, kind of phase 2. It'll be piped or plumbed in with the first tank that they both fill at the same time, both empty at the same time. The outlet goes by gravity down the hill to an irrigation pumping system, and that is then pumping drip irrigation to the fruit trees, to the gardens on the property. There's 5,000 liters in each of those tanks. It's a fairly substantial system. This one was created for stormwater management, and those 2 small buildings on the left were built. The building department said if you're putting new buildings on, you have to manage the water, which was only an additional, I think, 4 to 6% of water on the property, of roof area that was being covered. And so the end result was that we would infiltrate it back into the soil close by. So the downspouts off the roof, through piping underground, into a soak pit. 1,000 liters of capacity was what was designed. That was based on the requirement of how many millimeters of rainfall over what period of time, times the area of the roof, created the volume, and that was required then to be held back and retained on site through infiltration. This system here has 2 aspects to it: irrigation and stormwater management. They're handled with separate cistern units. So the water comes into the first 2 units, and there's connections below and above, so that they fill up at the same time. When they are full, then this 3rd unit fills, and as it fills up to the top, it can overflow out to the storm drain. But it also has a controlled volume outlet orifice near the bottom, so that it fills up fast when it's raining and leaks out or drains out very slowly also to the storm drain. And that fast fill, slow leak is what is controlling stormwater. It's detaining it on site and keeping it from rushing out into the storm drain and creating floods. Once irrigation begins, the first 2 tanks, of course, are going to be depleted. When it rains again, the first 2 tanks fill up first, and then the stormwater management tank kicks in. All of these are sized according to the need for irrigation, and then according to the need for how much stormwater needs to be detained for whatever period of time, and the orifice that allows that water out slowly is also set to be allowing the water out over a period of time. This system is underground. The first tank on the left is for emergency storage if the power goes out, if the well goes down, if there's problems that they can't supply water to the house and the facilities, then they have this stored water there. The second one is fire deterrence. They're out in the rural area. They want to be able to control wildfire around their buildings with a specialized rainmaker type of thing, not an irrigation sprinkler, but a water wall type of sprinkler. So that's what that's there for, and that's for 60 minutes of pressurized spray. The big one on the right is for irrigation. There's 700 and some square meters of food garden, and so the water fills this one up. It can fill up the other 2 as well after the irrigation one is filled up, but they're going to last. The other 2 small ones will be filled and just sit there, whereas the irrigation one will fill and empty according to the need in the gardens. All of this is going through a wicking or vortex filter. The overflow goes out to an outlet on the bank behind all of this with rock to keep it from eroding. And there's a backup fill in case, for example, there was a fire and the fire water had to be used. Then if there was no rain, there's a backup fill. It's called a makeup system from the well, and that's all included. It's 50,000 liters overall storage. I think there was some thought of actually increasing that size over the experience of last summer that was so dry. Again, underground, this one is intended for flushing. It could just as easily be for irrigation. So the water comes down through a filter, through a calming inlet on the right there. There's a switch just above the calming inlet that allows the system to know that the tank water is very low. If there's no rain, that will go down once the water's been used, and it will allow, under number 13 there on the right hand side, a makeup system from the municipal water to put some water into the tank. There's a pump there that pumps it up and over into number 16, which is a pressure tank through some filtration and back up to the toilet, so it is used for flushing. Of course, there's a switch on the pump. If the water's too low in the tank, the pump will not come on. There's a bit of a sonar measuring device at the very top there, number 10, that shows what the level of water is in there to kind of keep them informed inside the house. And there's a floating intake which allows the water from about 6 inches below the surface, wherever that surface is, to be pulled into the pump. That is the kind of the sweetest water, the sweet spot for good water in the tank. Not the very top, there's floaters always, and always going to be some sediment. And at the bottom there's going to be some sediment too, so we want to keep that off the bottom of the tank and not take the water off the top. And there's an overflow, number 4, so that the tank will always have an overflow. So this is another type of system, another type of arrangement. Here's an underground tank that has irrigation at the bottom and stormwater management at the top. And the controlled volume orifice outlet from the stormwater management detention system goes into a rain garden, and that rain garden then infiltrates into the soil, so there's some retention. If there's too much, there's an overflow there, and the overflow from the tank and from the rain garden both go out to the storm drain. There's a pump that can be connected to a standpipe, and it can draw water out to the drip irrigation system. There's also where A is, a potable water makeup with an air gap, and that allows us to put some water in the tank if we need to, so that irrigation can continue, especially in the food garden. So we have the stormwater management, we have the rain garden infiltration, we have irrigation, and quite substantial for keeping water on the site. This is an interesting system. The fellow who we talked about this with moves trees with a big tree spade. And so we talked about watering the trees once they're in the ground, and the idea was to set up for a year or so a tank with a little filter on it and a slow release orifice that would allow water to drip to the trees around the roots and water them from the bottom, keeping the root mass moist enough that it will allow itself to grow. It's quite traumatic for trees to be moved by tree spade. After a year or so, once things are back to normal, then he could come in and dismantle this and take it off to another site. So we could have a bunch of these kind of for the different trees. And if need be, pumping uphill, you could put a little pump on it, solar powered. There could be timers on it. There could be all sorts of other arrangements, but this is kind of the simplicity of the system. Details. Well, why and how do we get to where we're going with designing a system? And we all know that through the summer here we have the dry season when we have our most demand for water, and so we have these water restrictions. And that's the municipality protecting the source and saying we don't want you to use it all up in the month of June, so we have nothing left for July, August, and September. And I must admit the CRD does quite a good job of it. We have quite an enviable system of fresh water here in our area. Climate patterns and the norms are changing with climate change, and there are extremes that we are not seeing before. City of Toronto, I think, had 3 100-year storms in 5 years. That's way out of the norm. We also learned from some of the experts a couple of years ago at the Oxford Rainwater Convention in Austin, Texas, do the math. So here we have a chart at the top and a graph at the top and a chart at the bottom, and going through the number crunching. This is an Excel spreadsheet, kind of one of my second loves. Just going through the number crunching and making sure that the information is handled and that we have a starting point to say this is where we need to be, this is what's happening, we've analyzed the situation rather than just guessing. We work with the information on demand first. How much do we need? And that goes back to the question, why? If it's irrigation and stormwater management, we put the two together. If it's flushing and irrigation and stormwater management and maybe fire suppression, we put them all together into the mix, and then we know that we have the information we need to put into the number crunching. We configure the supply by knowing the rainfall for the month. We know the area that we're catching rainfall on, and we know that every 1 millimeter of rainfall on 1 square meter of roof is 1 liter of water, which weighs 1 kilogram. And we have a lot of fun with that with the fellows from south of the border and their number crunching, because they're using US gallons and square feet and inches, and it's quite fun. From all of that, we can determine a storage size that is optimum, which means that rainwater will handle all of the demand. If we find that we're using up all of the overflow and there's nothing left to capture and we haven't met demand, that's the maximum size. So from all of this number crunching, we determine those two things: the optimum size of tank or the maximum size of tank. And that's our starting point then to design the rest of the system. Here we have an indication of two cities, Victoria and Toronto, both with around 680 or 85 millimeters of rainfall. It's surprising Victoria has the same amount as Toronto. The factor here is that Toronto gets their rainfall in the summertime, sometimes in really nasty storms. We get our rainfall through the winter, very seldom with nasty storms. And so our storage for the same garden with the same roof and with the same requirements here is about 55,000 liters, and in Toronto about 1,000 liters. Will do exactly the same job for the same garden with the same roof, but it's only because of the weather patterns and the timing of when the water is required. Those are some of the details that we look at. The details of each system, we go back to some of the earlier pictures. There's a catchment area, the type of roofing, the slope of the roof, the gutter system and conveyance system that takes it through pre-filtration. It means pre-storage filtration. There's a calming inlet that allows the water in the tank not to be blasting the sediment around at the bottom and keeping it all mixed up all the time. There's an overflow outlet, which is mandatory. It's got to be there. The water has to go someplace away from the tanks, away from the building. And in most municipal approvals, you'll be having that go to the storm drain or to the storm ditch, or into some sort of infiltration like a rock pit or rain garden, that type of thing. And then there's also a demand use outlet. In this case, it's for irrigation, so the pump pumps the water up and out through the top rather than through the bottom, so you don't get leaks, and then it goes someplace, some beneficial use. Most systems will have something very similar. So catchment area, pre-filtration, there's an overflow outlet, demand use outlet again. The pump is pumping it out here. Sometimes that could be gravity. Demand use could be gravity, just going into a rain garden or something. In this case, there's post-storage filtration, and that is so that the water is suitable to be used in the toilet mechanism, and there won't be little pieces in there that are going to get caught in the mechanism and cause it to not work well. And again, the calming inlet. Very often, I'll get involved in actual looking at the site plan. There's a house here, and it's on a lot. It's actually two buildings close together. One is a garage building and workshop. But all of the incoming water and electrical and the outgoing sanitary sewer connection, storm sewer connection, and the connections from the eaves trough to the storm sewer and from the perimeter drains to the storm sewer. All of these things had to be mapped and approved. So we have the builder, we have the owner, we have the contractor, we have the municipality, we have the engineering firm, and the rainwater people, and then myself, and I forget who else was involved. There's always somebody else I can never remember. So that the rainwater harvesting system interrupts the connection between the roof and the storm drain. Somewhere in between is where we're putting in a cistern. We're using that water, and that is an interruption to that, so that changes the way things work. And it doesn't show on this plan, but there are 2 tanks in this plan, both used for irrigation, and then the overflow goes where the storm drain, out to the storm drain where the actual downspout drains would have gone originally, and hooks up to where the perimeter drain is coming in as well at the same time. Some of the things that I run into, just a single barrel here. It's up on blocks to keep it up off the ground a little bit. I'm not so sure why the outlet is so high in the barrel, unless they're expecting a lot of gunge. It has an automatic overflow that when that tank is full, the water just does not go through the pipe. It goes straight down the downspout. There's 3 here. They're cobbled together with a small line, and so they'll all fill up. The first one fills up, the second one fills up, the third one fills up. I don't know where the overflow is. In this particular case, it probably just comes flowing out the top of the tank. Unfortunately, it does. Each one does have a low level outlet, and the first one over there on the left has a higher level outlet. I know in this particular case that after a period of time, the owner would come out and shut the disconnect the line into the tank, knowing that the tanks are full. It could be sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning. It's been raining. I got to go shut my barrels off. So there was an automated system trying to be established to replace this over time. Now here's a big system. Not everybody has this much space or needs this much capacity. These are concrete cisterns. They will accept water from the downspouts, which aren't shown yet. And the outlet is at this end here, the overflow outlet, and that will go to the bank behind us. And it will be actually augmented yet with 2 more plastic tanks. This is for irrigation, so the concrete isn't too bad. Rainwater is slightly acidic. Concrete is alkaline, and the 2 make water kind of closer to the neutral, and that's helpful too. This system is up near Hilliers, and it's homemade. It's got screen door screening over top of a bucket on an angle, homemade. Works very well. I'm surprised. It's got a huge tank there that's used indoors, and they're going to be adding another tank to it. It works. It may not be what you see in the stores for sale for equipment, but it does work, and it does have the overflow. So when the tank does get full, the water can escape and not just bubble out someplace. It goes out across the grass, across the lawn to a low area. And these are some other things that I get to see as well. So open-ended gutters, not good. Some sort of homemade gutter capture devices where the water flows out the end of the gutter and flops into this big plastic thing and then down a pipe and into the tank. And that is a potable system. Those 2 pictures on the left are from the same actual site. The one on the right, well, it's been that way for 4 years that I've been here. Captures about 0.2 of a liter per year. It's a rainwater system that isn't. It doesn't work. It's intended to work. Now, I asked people what the main problem is here, and everybody says, oh, water and hydro, or water and electricity. You can't mix the 2, and they shouldn't be so close together. That's bad. I also look more closely at the sign on the right. It says non-potable drinking water. This is a real sign. This is a real location. I won't say which municipality. I'm hoping that they've changed it by now, but just one of these crazy things. We can ask the question, what does the plumbing code allow as uses for rainwater? If you know, then you can answer the question. In BC, it's basically indoor flushing. I shouldn't say indoor flushing, I said flushing. If it is irrigation, it's on hold. And so every municipality is dealing with it differently. And all across the country it's different. People ask a lot of great questions. How much rainwater do we need to capture? Well, let's ask the question, how much do you need? And your situation will be different than your neighbor's situation, even if your roof is the same size, even if you get the same number of kids, the same number of cars, the same income. How much do I need to capture is based on how much you need to use and what purposes it's for. Again, the question, why? Is it safe to drink? Rainwater can be made safe to drink, but as it is coming off the roof, even with its filtration, pre-filtration before going to storage, it is non-potable water. In other words, no, it is not considered safe to drink. Therefore, all these other treatment drains have to go into place. How much will it cost me, and will I save money? Based on a roughly average of $2 a cubic meter for water supplied to municipalities, it's going to take a long, long time to recapture the investment in the rainwater system, even if it's $2,000 or $5,000 or $10,000. However, if it's looking at the cost of a rainwater system versus the cost of a new well, or expanding on an older well, it's expensive, it can be expensive, perhaps then that changes things. Then also let's look at the next level of things. What are the environmental values? We talk about living green infrastructure. We talk about living green assets of municipalities. What is the value of them? If we can infiltrate water back into the soil for groundwater, if we can rehabitat, that's not the right word, if we can fix up old habitats that are undergoing so much change and stress because they're not getting the water that they used to have in the streams and the headwaters for these smaller watersheds, and so the ecology is changing there, and that ecology dies, and another one below it dies out, and another one below it dies out, and all these separate pieces don't work together. If we could go back to those things, how vibrant our environment would be. And that cost, if we can measure that, and there are ways to do it, I'm not into that, but there are ways to measure that, makes a big difference. Will I save money in the long run? Depending how you're measuring it. If it's only by how much water I'm saving by not having to pay the municipality for the water that I would normally buy, it's going to take a long time. If all these other costs are put into it and different values, it's different. In winter, does the system freeze and become damaged? In our part of the world, not so much unless you're up high in altitude or perhaps in the interior. It's the pipes that will freeze first because they're smaller, and if water's not moving. If the water's in bulk in a tank, it has less chance of freezing, and there's ways to get around it too. You can insulate pipes, you can put heat tape on them, you can bury them below frost line, you can put little heaters in the tanks, recirculate the water, keep it moving, put it inside a building where it's going to stay warmer and not be so subject to cold, all those types of things. Why are we talking about rainwater harvesting in the wettest areas of Canada? Because we have the same problems that the driest areas have. That is, the stormwater management is the big one. We also have the seasonal aspects where we want to have water for our gardens and outdoor use, that we don't want to use potable water, so we're saving on the potable water infrastructure, that whole system that creates the potable water, by using rainwater, even here in the wettest areas, because we don't get the rain in the summertime. And there's other aspects that go along with that as well. Is it better for my plants, my animals, pets, and for humans? A lot of people say yes. In fact, it was rainwater that we had in cisterns. When I was a kid, my grandparents had cisterns, and they would use that for watering plants in the house, in the garden. They would use that for washing hair. They would use that for other aspects too, I think, although they were hooked up to municipal water. But you go back another century or what else did the people have? Was rainwater, or they had surface water from streams or lakes and ponds, or they had groundwater from wells. Is it safe? There's another question. Is it better for my plants? It's a little bit acidic. It likes to draw. It is considered by many people, yes, the best water for plants. Once it's treated as potable water, it's good water. It's drinkable, and so it becomes part of our everyday life as well. This is a class we had in Duncan in October, training rainwater harvesting practitioners. I was in Baltimore with a couple of other trainers. We had a big group of plumbers and pipe fitters who were working there, and they actually built 6 systems that week. Did this over 2 days, and it was an extremely valuable learning lesson for these people who are actually trainers for the plumbing and pipe trades across the central eastern U.S. The ARCS accredited professional training has no prerequisite. It's recognized professionals who have achieved an advanced level of competence. So in other words, people who want to get into this business, who want to do this, who enjoy it as part of their business. Perhaps it's a plumber, perhaps it's a landscaper, perhaps it's somebody who is in permaculture or is wanting to do just rainwater harvesting. So design, installation, this is training that gets you to a point of understanding best practices and knowing that we have a high standard of installation rather than by guess and by golly. It's a 2-day course, and it's offered in Canada and the U.S. I'll be going to Calgary shortly. And we just finished, like I said, in Baltimore. I was in Los Angeles in the middle of April. The development of agreements with different groups is that we are training other trainers as well. So the plumbers and gas fitters in the U.S. is, it's Canada as well, but they're starting with the group out of Washington area and Baltimore. These are trainers within the United Association, and so they're picking up this ARCSA accreditation to train rainwater harvesting in the midst of everything else that they do. And they are also then accredited ARCSA instructors. And so we have these memoranda of understanding with plumbers and gas fitters, with Laborers International Union, with the John Deere Green Tech Group that's been bought out by Site 1, with Gaia College, a course that I run here in rainwater management, with Santa Fe College, also part of a larger program there. And in summer we'll have an online accredited professional workshop equivalent. It's a course that people can take online they can buy into it, and they take it on their own time. They answer quizzes and go through a process of learning that duplicates the 2-day workshop. So that's it in a nutshell. I really am glad to have spoken to you instructors in the pipe trades. I'm glad to have had the opportunity to speak with you at Camosun, to meet with you. It was a great group. There were great questions. And I'm hoping that you will take advantage of the program that we have up and coming in training, and that you can also share this with your students. I know here at Camosun it's a part of the classroom already, and they have a great sample system that if you get a chance to go and see it. This is my contact information, and be happy to answer questions or to share information with you if you want to get hold of me.